It's hard to hope, hard to cope with crisis.
But while we might be all alone, we've never been more tightly tethered, because we'll only weather this unknown together. So we get to work. We mend, we don't break even when we bend. Somewhere, another mom pays her bills. Somewhere, another child eats his fill. We are the world's neighbors, making our communities brighter, greater, fighting for every person in the neighborhood. We, the coming of the common good, so dare to care, to be hope-sighted. We're never divided, for when we live to give, we always live united.
Wow, what a way to start this webinar. Thank you all for joining us today. If that didn't get you inspired, then I guarantee you our two guests here today are going to get you incredibly inspired. So once again, thank you for joining us. It's perks like this that you get from your Women United's membership. So please, during the campaign, as we kick it off, don't forget to click that option in. So let's get started. We have a lot of questions to get to, and we have some amazing author here in front of us. Welcome, Brad, the actually United Way campaign chair, for joining Women United today and helping us with our kickoff. And thank you, Sheryl, former United Way campaign chair, as well as a former city manager, as well as a friend and colleague, author, and just overall amazing rock star Wonder Woman. Thank you for being here.
Glad to be here. Thank you.
So before we get started, I just wanted to quickly, again, thank you for joining, because if it wasn't for our membership, we wouldn't be 3,700 women and men strong to do the things that we want to do and can do in our community. A quick brief mission reminder. Our mission is to break generational poverty through education. Jossie Strauss, our founder over 20 years ago, realized that it was through education that was going to break the key to everything. And we have held that gauntlet 20 years strong. We have raised collectively about $52 million over that 20-year period. Last year, we were able to raise $2 million. And that money goes directly into child care scholarships, the key to breaking generational poverty. Our community today is talking about, well, quite frankly, our nation is talking about equity. Well, Women United has been providing equity a long time ago. We provide scholarships for parents that want to go back to school to get 2-year, 4-year, a work accreditation, or some type of certificate, knowing that they can get higher wages, better access to health care, a secure place for their child to go to daycare, all the while they're serving their dreams. So that is a nice wrapped up package about what Women United is about and what we provide to the community. So moving along, I want to introduce Brad Barron, CEO of New Star and this year's United Way campaign chair. You have someone special that you need to introduce.
Thank you. Thank you, Debbie. So it's great to be here. I'm a big believer in the work that Women United does in our community, supporting our community and supporting the family and children in our community. As all of you know, we've experienced a big 1-2 punch nationwide, and particularly here in San Antonio, with the coronavirus. You know, first there's the economic devastation that comes from the coronavirus. Then, as Debbie alluded to, the coronavirus has really sharply exposed the racial and social inequity in our community. So one of the great things about United Way, and particularly the work that's been done recently with United Way, is that it has focused United Way's mission so that it is, I think, particularly capable of addressing those issues. So these are the issues councils and the work they've come up with to end generational poverty. So it's very impressive work. I applaud everyone involved with Women United, and thank you for everything that you've done.
I have one interjection before, I'm sorry.
Yeah.
I'm new at moderating, so I apologize, but if you ladies online want to ask questions later on to Sheryl, please hit your Q&A and we'll be monitoring those questions as we move on. Okay, now you're back.
All right, so I'm back. So I do want to highlight the breakthrough work that United Way is doing in these areas to support women and families and children. United Way, it's difficult this year, right? United Way is a high-touch endeavor. So at New Star, we have a big kickoff campaign. We have everybody in the cafeteria. We're shoulder to shoulder. It's exciting. There's drinks. There's cocktail parties. We take all of our employees to see the United Way agencies and show them the real need in the community. Many of you, your companies have special events, and we can't do that this year. And so we're looking for ways to engage with our donor base, and we're looking for ways to explain what United Way does. And so we have a series of short videos. We have a longer campaign video that's just about ready to be released. But one of the things we developed this year are some short videos about what United Way is doing. They're usually a minute to a minute and a half, and here's an example. We've been able to support this new strategic vision because of supporters like all of you. So I want to thank all of you. And I really want to applaud Women United. Women United, we were talking about this before we went on the air, has become a huge part of the United Way campaign. So last year, I believe Women United raised $5.3 million, about 10% of the total campaign. So I know we can't hear that, but I would like for all of you to applaud yourselves and your accomplishments and what you do for United Way. When I found out I was going to be this year's community campaign chair, one of the things that I was excited about was hosting Women United at New Star. We always make our building available for this event, and I was really excited to host everybody there. And so last year, I come downstairs, the event's about to start, and I'm standing in the back, and I'm watching Stuart Parker comes out, and he's, like Stuart is, he's tall and he's well dressed, and he looks like a fighter pilot. And so he comes out, and then lo and behold, there's a life-size poster of Stuart in his fighter pilot gear with a helmet under his arm and, standing by an F-16. And I'm standing there looking at that going, man, what am I going to do? And so Lisa Brunswald is sitting next to me, and she leans over and she goes, you're going to have to up your game there, big boy. So anyway, I'm not a fighter pilot, and I don't have an F-16, but I have found a way to top that. So I brought one of the most impressive and powerful leaders our city has ever seen, Sheryl Sculley. As the 2013 United Way campaign chairwoman and San Antonio City Manager, Sheryl Sculley has been at the forefront of every major civic issue in San Antonio for the past 14 years. What's more, she puts her money where her mouth is. She has been a member of our Alexis de Tocqueville Society. Those are the folks who give $10,000 or more each year since she came to San Antonio, since 2005. She's also been a United Way volunteer for 40 years, having served on the boards of United Way for all 3 cities where she served as city manager. She's been dubbed the best city manager in America. For those of you that lived in San Antonio prior to her arrival and who live here now, you know why she's been dubbed the best city in America. She's made us very proud of our city. The changes she's made during her tenure, from improving financial management to achieving a AAA bond rating from all the rating agencies. I believe we're the only major city in America that has that distinction. She's invested in our parks. She's invested in our senior community centers, revitalization of the Lower Riverwalk or the Upper Riverwalk, Haven for Hope, Pre-K for SA. The initiatives and her accomplishments go on and on. Of course, she's added the title of author to her resume, and she's just released a book about her time as city manager. It's called Greedy Bastards. We'll talk about that. I've been fortunate enough to read it. I'm also happy to say I'm not in it. I was thrilled by that. Some people are, and they were not thrilled by that. So anyway, I encourage you to get a copy and read it. It is a page turner. So Sheryl, welcome.
Thank you.
So-
I'm glad to be here.
Good. So please tell us a little bit about why you wrote this book and what readers can get from it.
Yeah, so I wrote the book really as a history lesson for the community so that they understood what had happened over the past 14 years. I certainly didn't undertake all of these changes on my own. We built a very strong team, and we worked as a team to make dramatic change for the community. So it's a bit of a documentation or history lesson about San Antonio over the past 14 years, but also for other city managers. Some of what I talk about in the book, specifically as it pertains to change management and taking on the police and fire unions, is very pertinent today. In fact, the book is more relevant today than it was when I started writing it a year ago. But it's also a guidebook for city managers, elected officials, and communities that are looking to turn around a local government organization and take on the powerful public safety unions. As we know, there's a lot of change that's needed, not just here in San Antonio, but in cities across the country.
So let's set the stage a little bit. So you were heavily recruited to come here in 2005. So what did you find when you came here?
Well, I didn't apply for the job here. I was contacted by a search firm that was working with Mayor Garza and the City Council back in early 2005. I did interview with the City Council, and they were having an election that May and perhaps a runoff election in June if necessary. I remember asking to meet the mayoral candidates, and there were two City Council members running for mayor, Julian Castro and Carol Schubert. There was a third candidate, but they said, you don't have to meet with him because he doesn't have a chance. He's not going to win. Anyway, we interviewed. They offered me a substantial amount of money to come to San Antonio, saying that they were looking for a dramatic change. They wanted someone from the outside who had experience at doing the kinds of things they were looking for. And my salary became controversial during the election process. And I withdrew from the process and wished them well and said, I'm staying in Phoenix. I had a great position there in the number 2 position, and I had hoped to become city manager in that city. And then the election happened, and Phil Hardberger was elected. And over the summer, he convinced me to come to San Antonio. He was, at the time, the retired Chief Justice of the 4th Court of Appeals. And he convinced me that he needed my help and that they were committed to the kinds of change in a unanimous way that was needed to get the organization turned around. So I said yes, and then Hurricane Katrina hit the coast about a week later. So I began, even before I was officially on the job, coming in to help with that recovery effort and get things started for my new position.
I remember that. So the book details a lot of the things that you found when you got here, the financial mismanagement, the disarray, the police and fire union contracts, things like that. So one of the things I didn't quite realize until I read your book is the turnover in the city council. And can you talk a little bit about how that affected your ability to do your job?
Well, San Antonio is different than most other council manager form of government cities. So the council manager plan is the most common in the country, but not as much so in the largest cities. So if you think about New York, Chicago, LA, Houston, Atlanta, San Francisco, those are strong mayor form of government cities, and most of the department heads turnover as mayors change within those cities. In a council manager plan, and the largest city in the country is Phoenix, Arizona. The second largest is San Antonio. The third is Dallas. In a council manager plan, there is a CEO that is hired to run the day-to-day operations and to manage the organization and make recommendations to the city council on what needs to be done to improve not only the organization, but service delivery to the public and to be connected in the community. But we have more turnover than exists in most other cities. So when I came to San Antonio in 2005, council members could only serve two-year terms. I tell a story in the book when my husband and I had left an event, and during my first year as city manager, he asked me, does everybody here get a chance to be on the city council? Everybody I meet says, I'm a former city council member. He said, I don't think I met anybody that didn't say they were a former city council member. I laughed at the time and said, it does feel that way because there is so much turnover. But what that does is make it very difficult for the city to think long-term, to think big picture for the city itself, but also to think longer term, because the reward system, the political reward system, is how much can I get done for the constituents that I serve, those people who vote for me, how much can I get done within this 2-year period of time, because that's all I have. And maybe if I'm lucky, I'll have 4 years, 2-year terms. So it makes it very difficult because when people come in, we're a big organization. 13,000 employees, 40 different city departments, nearly $3 billion annual budget, and it's a very diversified municipal corporation. We're a company of companies, so to speak, because we're managing and running the airport, we're building roads, we're responding to emergency medical services, we're providing guidance and policy guidance on public health. We're just doing so many diverse kinds of things that it takes time to understand and know and get up to speed on how to provide policy guidance on all of those things. So, and then of course they're always running for office and fundraising and all of that. By comparison, I'll tell you that in Phoenix, and I served there for 16 years, and I worked with half as many council members as I did in San Antonio. So here I worked with 47 over the 14 years, and it's when you have that kind of turnover, it's very hard to think longer term. What do we want to accomplish over the next 5 years, 8 years? Where do we want to be into the future? And to have buy-in from those who come after people leave. So it's much more work for the staff, but it's also more difficult, I think, for the community. You don't want to be a ping pong ball kind of bouncing around without some direction, and that doesn't mean you can't modify your direction and adjust course, as we are doing now with COVID-19, but you need to have a plan and be able to stick to it and have performance metrics to guide whether or not you're meeting those kinds of improvements that you're trying to accomplish.
Right. Well, I've seen about in terms of board of directors, if you had 47 different directors in the course of,
14 years.
That's not manageable. So,
right.
So let's talk a little bit about the title of your book. So there's a lot in your book. So there's a lot of things about leadership and the way to run an organization, but obviously the book is about the public safety contracts and the struggles that you had there. So tell us a little bit about the title of the book and then how you decided to tackle those contracts.
Well, I can't take credit for the title of the book entirely. It was inspired by the police union president. In one of the early interviews that he did, I remember in that video back in 2014, he accused my staff and I of characterizing the public safety personnel as greedy bastards. But he said, we're not. And I remember seeing that video for the first time and commenting to my staff in a half-joking way, gosh, if I ever write a book someday, he just gave me the title. And so when we decided to take on this challenge, and it was an immense challenge, I knew it would be, but I thought it'd take a couple of years, it would be very difficult, but then I could leave a financial legacy that meant that the city was in better financial stead because we had addressed the 1988 contracts. Changing what had been in place for 25 years was a big challenge, and I think the title reflects that. It also reflects how difficult that journey was and how far the union would go to protect what they had, even if it meant harm to the city organization and the city of San Antonio's financials.
So can you give us an example of that? Just maybe one little anecdote. I don't want to spoil the book for people, but maybe just one little thing about how far the union's willing to go.
Well, I do remember we had what was called, commonly referred to as the Legacy Task Force, and it was a pension and health care services group of individuals, half of which were from our employee organizations and the unions. The other half represented business experts from the community that were experts in pension and health care. And there were 12 people, the mayor, Mayor Castro, and the council members appointed representatives to be on that task force, and then the mayor asked me to also serve. I was the 13th member of the task force. And my staff, of course, staffed that task force, and we were talking about these issues, and one of the union members said during the course of the conversation, if you don't have enough money to keep paying us what we got back in 1988, then just raise taxes. To which I said, easy for you to say, since most of you don't live in the city of San Antonio. And to me, that's a bit of a problem too. Less than half of our police officers live in San Antonio, and only 40% of our firefighters actually live in the city. I knew as city manager I was not going to recommend property tax increases to be able to afford those contracts. In fact, during my tenure, I recommended and the council approved lowering the city's tax rate 4 times. I knew that there was a way to remodel the healthcare structure and the benefit structure of those contracts that would still provide them with excellent healthcare and benefits, but could be affordable to the taxpayers, and that was our goal.
Right. There's a great chart in the book that shows how those contracts would have ultimately bankrupted the city. There's no way to keep up with that. So
yeah, we early in the process, and actually a couple of years before we decided to take on these contract changes, I had been laying the groundwork to show, and it became really evident during the Great Recession because we had less revenue year over year. Property tax values declined. Our sales tax revenue was down during the recession. And rather than raise taxes, we made cuts within the city's budget. We did not cut police and fire, which meant that since they were 2/3 of the general fund budget, we had to make reductions in community facility hours and parks maintenance and street maintenance and public health and library hours, all of those other things that are important to the community. But I realized that we couldn't let this go on, and so we did an analysis to understand when would public safety consume 100% of the general fund, since their expenses were growing faster than our revenues. And that was, depending upon the scenario, 2031, 2040, if you took a longer look at it, or throw in a recession, which we know happens in cycles, 2024. So in 10 years, we would have nothing else but public safety. And we aren't going to let that happen as a community, but that means that you have to change your business model.
right. So you identified this issue. You began to address it or attack this issue. You hit resistance pretty much at every turn. So, and then it became, the fight became very personal and sometimes vicious. So let me ask you, do you think that you being a woman had anything to do, would they have treated a man differently in that role?
I do. I think they treated me much worse than they would have a man, especially a man from San Antonio. I don't think would have been treated that way. I have to say that during that process, and I told my staff, I'm not going to look at all these TV ads or the social media that they're putting out. Let me know if there's something in particular I really need to take a look at. But I think what people perhaps didn't realize at the time that I was still running the city organization and our city government. And so it wasn't just working on that project, which was in addition to the day-to-day management of the organization. And I said, I've got to keep my head on straight here, stay focused, and I'm not going to let that drag me down. So let's stay focused on what we're trying to accomplish, and let me know if there's something I really need to see.
Got it. Okay, so moving forward from your time, working on those issues to today. So I think with the George Floyd the George Floyd situation, the murder of George Floyd, and the focus on racial justice and equity, I think people are beginning to realize that many police chiefs around the country have their hands tied by union contracts. So what changes need to be made to San Antonio's union contracts to empower Chief McManus to actually deal with some of these issues?
I'm glad you asked that question because there are changes in the disciplinary process as specified in the union contract that do need to change. There was a piece done by KSAT 12 with regard to, it's called Broken Blue, and Steve Spriester narrated that, and it gives the examples of the officers who Chief McManus fired and then were brought back through the arbitration process. Changing the disciplinary process was a priority for us in 2014 when we began the negotiations on the contract that took so long to get those changes. It was a priority, but in the end, once we achieved the financial changes with healthcare, I think the council, the mayor and council, and the community had grown tired of the fight and said, take that and work on the disciplinary changes in the next contract. I did not want to do that because I knew that it was limiting the chief's ability to best manage the department. We'd made a lot of changes to improve service delivery to the community. I'm certainly not anti-police. I recommended and the city council approved adding nearly 700 new police and fire officer positions during my tenure. It's a core business of the city, but it also has to be affordable to the public. And the chief has to manage his good and even the bad officers. So there are two things that govern that process. They're both in the Texas Local Government Code. One is Chapter 143 that provides civil service protection and offers the arbitration alternative for police officers who are fired by the chief. And that process brings in an outside third-party arbitrator to second guess the chief and to tell him whether or not he should have fired the officer. When we get officers back that we think have done something so egregious they'd be a harm to the public, they get put on desk duty, and we won't let them back out on the street. The second thing that provides for some of the protection is Chapter 174, and that is a provision that allows cities to vote for collective bargaining. So collective bargaining was approved, even though we're a right-to-work state in Texas, collective bargaining was voted on by San Antonio voters in 1974. It was approved by a vote of 10,000 to 3,000. It was a special election back then, and I know we had fewer people living here then, but that's a pretty small turnout for a election of that significance. But collective bargaining was approved, and so in our collective bargaining contracts, we have provisions such that in an arbitration scenario, the chief cannot use in arbitration the entire file of that police officer because some bad behavior may get reduced to a written reprimand over a period of time, or they can use their leave time to handle a suspension. The chief, if he doesn't hear about the wrongdoing within 180 days, then he can't take action, or that timeline can be used against. I mean, it's ludicrous. And I met with the police chief every Monday morning for the 14 years I was city manager, and spent an hour just talking with him on the major issues, where we stood with crime in the community. And we'd talk about some of these situations and how he was going to handle officers that shouldn't be out on the street. That most of the officers do an outstanding job for the community. They're trained well and they do the right thing. I attended all their graduations over the years, and they want to do well when they leave. But you will have a few that don't and can't self-correct, even with additional training, and they shouldn't be on the force, and the chief should be able to remove them.
So before we move on to some of your other accomplishments and some happier topics, so let me ask you, is there any decision or anything that you wish you had done differently in dealing with those public safety contracts?
Yeah, I think we would have developed a better communication plan and had that adopted by the mayor and city council. The mayors, and I say mayors because I worked with several mayors as this stretched on for several years, and council members were supportive of what I was doing, what my team and I were doing to try to get this corrected throughout the process. Wasn't always unanimous, but it was a large majority of the councils over that time, and the mayors were all supportive of what we were doing. I didn't know it was going to take this long, but I think we should have had a better communication plan, because as I talked in the community, and I believed that a data-driven, honest, transparent process would allow us to have a conversation in a rational way and then make changes that were needed. There I was mistaken. And I think we needed a communication plan, because it never failed when I would talk with a group and explain what I was trying to change. They would say, oh, that's not what was in the media. I didn't hear that. Can you send me something in writing that describes that so I can share it with the people in my organization or in my company? And I started doing that, and by the end of the process, I think that little letter that I was sending out in the community had like 600 people on the list who were asking for, can I get the real facts on what's happening? So I think we needed a more definitive plan. I did bring the negotiations to City Hall. By law, they're required to be open to the public in Texas, a right-to-work state. They previously, before my time, had been in an attorney's conference room, not exactly open to the public. I'm sure it was posted correctly. But I decided that if we were going to have a real conversation about this, it needed to be in a place where the public felt comfortable coming and viewing what was happening. And our public information staff would brief the media who would attend ahead of time to let them know what we'd be talking about for the day. And the unions did not like that. They viewed it as throwing down the gauntlet and bad-mouthing them, and that's not what was happening at all. I don't think they wanted us to really discuss those 1988 contracts. They were controversial back then. I wasn't here then. I'm not passing judgment, but I knew they were no longer affordable and clearly not sustainable, and that they needed to change.
So that's a great part of the book. I don't want to spoil this for people who haven't read the book, so let's move on to some things that are particularly important to Women United. So Women United, one of their big causes are child care scholarships. So I know pre-K for SA is something that was accomplished during your tenure here as city manager. Can you talk a little bit more about pre-K for SA, why that's important for the city, and did you hit any resistance with that, and how did you overcome it?
Well, with 1.5 million people, there are always some who don't agree with the direction you're going. However, Mayor Castro had appointed a brainpower task force led by Charles Butt and retired General Joe Robles, at the time was CEO of USAA. It included business representatives as well as educators, and they recommended that we go to the voters for a 1/8 cent sales tax increase, which was the capacity remaining for the city that we could spend on public improvements, and put that money into education, and specifically early childhood education. That was back in 2012, and after they made that recommendation, Mayor Castro asked me if my team and I would put together a business plan, which we did that summer. The council approved it, and we went to the voters in 2012 to talk about early childhood education that includes 4 centers, north, south, east, and west, within San Antonio, educating only 4-year-olds, 2,000 of them annually, 500 in each school. So I was charged with, these are all city employees, and we hired just outstanding early childhood master certified educators to work at our schools, and it has been a huge success. And I don't say that just because I'm proud of the program, but rather we're in our 8th year, and we hire a third-party independent group to evaluate our program and the students' performance. And compared to other students throughout the state of Texas, our students now in public schools are performing above average of the students here in Texas. And many of the kids that come into our program, most of them come from low-income families that otherwise would not have the opportunity to provide an academically rigorous early childhood education experience. Most importantly, we provide extended day. So for working families or single parents, the child can be there until 6 p.m. with a supervised activity after the full day of pre-K education. And that has helped so many working families. And many of them don't have a college degree, or some of them don't even have a GED, and we have a family engagement center in each of the schools, and we help families get connected with services that will help them as well. Some of our biggest advocates for the program are the families that have graduated from the program, and one of the best compliments I've received over the years is from parents who say, "Can my child stay here for kindergarten? We love the program. It's been wonderful for our family." So this item is on the ballot for November 3rd for a renewal, an 8-year renewal. The first election was for 8 years, the 1/8 cent sales tax in 2012. So here we are in 2020, and we're recommending to the voters that we renew pre-K for SA on November 3rd for another 8 years. And we're expanding it this year so that the income requirements include more people that are right on the cusp. Let's say that they aren't below 50,000 in terms of their family income for the year, but they're in that space between 50 and 75,000 where they still cannot afford this kind of program, but based on an ability to pay, we're expanding it to include about 30% of our seats for those children as well. I'm hopeful that we can get to universal pre-K education for all of our children in San Antonio, because like Jossie Strauss, who founded Women United 20 years ago, education is so important to our community. It really is the key to the future. And so when I heard resistance, it would be, why is the city getting involved in education? But there were many kids who were left out, who didn't have access to this, and but for the program would still be without that kind of program. And her son, Joe Strauss, is of course carrying on the torch because he and Peter John Holt are co-chairing the Early Matters Task Force, where we have talked about for the past year how we can promote academically rigorous early childhood education for all children in San Antonio, regardless of their income level.
Well, I applaud you and your team for putting together such a great business plan, implementing it, and the results speak for themselves. I mean,
well, thank you. And
objective.
credit goes also to Elaine Mendoza, who chairs the pre-K board of directors, and the entire board. Over the years, they've done just tremendous work, working closely with our CEO of that program, Dr. Sarah Beret. She's outstanding in the work that she's done, and if anyone has heard her speak, she's wonderful, and we're all very proud of pre-K for SA.
That's great. Well, turning back to United Way. So when I was introducing you, I mentioned that you'd been campaign chair. You've done this job before. You've been involved with United Way for 40 years. So tell us why you're such a passionate advocate for United Way.
Part of it is because I'm a public servant and I see firsthand the needs in the community and how important United Way is to serve so many agencies that are providing outstanding work and help to those who need it most. I worked with a city manager early in my career that required us to be involved in some way in the community, and I come from a family that was actively involved in the communities growing up. So it's part of my nature, but I also felt a responsibility, and in leadership positions, the employees pay attention to what the leader is doing. And I know we took our campaign here in San Antonio from about a $300,000 campaign. We set a goal to get it to $1 million campaign, and I'm proud that we did that almost 10 years ago. And our employees are so generous, and
really
at
are.
all levels of the organization. So we're proud to be in that $1 million category and to participate, to have a seat at the table. And I was proud to serve on the board in all 3 cities where I've worked.
So we have you here. There's a lot of young women that are watching this. They see a strong female leader sitting here. What advice would you give to working women who are just starting their career or midway through their career, working their way up their career ladder?
Yeah. Well, a couple of things. First, if you haven't completed your education, you need to do that, whether it's a 4-year degree or working on a master's degree. So many of our 21st century jobs require a lot of education, and so that would be first and foremost. Secondly, to take risks and step outside of your comfort zone. I know early in my career, women, and I say that because I was the first woman in every position I earned over the years, except here in San Antonio. And so women were kind of pigeonholed into human resources or social services, and that was about it. And I remember saying, I want to be in charge of engineering and finance and public safety. And they were like, whoa, wait a minute. And so I had experience, not directly over that, but over time and of course became city manager in Kalamazoo, Michigan, as a very young person. I think back on that now, what did I know at age 32? But they saw some promise in me, and that seemed to work out pretty well. But I think taking those kinds of risks and doing some things that maybe is really outside of your comfort zone, but trying something new. And I encourage employees as well to get involved with the United Way campaign, to take on a leadership role. If you're not in a supervisory position, but you want to move into one, get involved in our city campaign. It's a huge campaign. We have a campaign committee that represents all the departments, and you can gain some leadership skills in that way as well. So those are my 2 pieces of advice for today. And also for young people to read the book, because it gives you some history, at least recent history, about the city of San Antonio and how far we've come and what's yet to be done.
So your accomplishments are myriad, and so I want to ask you, what do you feel like your greatest accomplishment has been here in San Antonio?
Oh, wow, that's a tough one. But I think leaving legacy leaders in the city organization. When I was recruited here, they wouldn't consider people inside the organization for the city manager's position. They wanted someone from the outside. So I knew my work was cut out for me. But as I left, all 6 of my assistant and deputy managers applied for the job, were interviewed for the job. Any one of the 6 could have done the job, and they selected one of my deputies as my successor. So I'm proud of that. I'm also proud of the department heads. I worked hard to identify people from the community and inside the organization that I could promote, but also test them against the national talent pool and bring some people in from the outside, like Bill McManus. Chief McManus was one of the first people I hired, Chief Charles Hood the subsequent year. But I also promoted from within. Rod Sanchez, we were talking about Rod earlier, and he was in charge of development services and was responsible for turning that around. So it's really about giving people an opportunity, but with proper coaching and training as well. So we put executive leadership, mid-management academies, supervisory academies, and I'm proud of our women's leadership mentoring program to help especially women in the organization get the promotions they were looking for and succeed in their own goals. So having those kinds of programs in place is important, and I feel as though I left behind a well-oiled machine, and that they can handle most, as they have very well through this COVID-19 situation. They've had a lot on their plate for the past year, and I'm very proud of their work.
Yeah, you've trained some fantastic leaders. I mean, your people who worked under you have gone on to run some of the most important cities in the country. So.
Yeah, well, T.C. Broadnex, who I recruited to San Antonio in 2006, is now city manager in Dallas, and Peter Zanoni, I promoted 2 or 3 times in the past 14 years. He's now city manager in Corpus Christi. We have another one, Jesus Garza, in Victoria, Texas. Penny Post Oak Ferguson is up in Johnson County, Kansas. So yeah, I'm very proud of that. And I hear from them occasionally, and but I try not to get in their way. If they call and ask for advice, I'll give it, but they're in charge now, and I wish them all well.
So turning back to this audience of female leaders, can you say a little bit about the quote you have in your book from Madeleine Albright?
Yeah. Yeah, there's a special place in hell for women who don't help other women. That's hard, especially for me. You know, when I was the first woman in every position, there was a thinking back then that there could only be one woman in the room. And there was a bit of, figuratively speaking, clawing going on because the other women wanted to be the woman in the room. And we need to be supportive of other women and help them, and it raises the tide for all the ships when we do that. So yeah, that's one of my favorite quotes, because having experienced the other side of that, I think it's important for women to support other women. And there are so many women friends that I have in Women United that have been so supportive over my tenure in San Antonio. I really appreciate them very much.
So I have a few more questions that I want to end with, but Debbie, are there questions from the audience that you want to ask? Or the audience wants to ask?
Yes, Brad, I actually do have one. One of our Women United members wants to know that she's read your book, and she, of course, thinks it's incredible. She wants to know if you have plans for another one yet, and if you do, what would you think it would be about?
That's a good question. I'm still on the speaking tour for this book, but my editor suggested that I do something very specific for women. If I were to do another book, some of my staff at City Hall think I should write about some of the other changes and how we went about transforming some of the operations in a variety of other city departments. I only give a few examples in the book, in the first half of the book, but we did that throughout the entire city organization, and that could be helpful to other city managers as well. I have been asked by a few universities already about using my book in their syllabus for classwork this fall, and they've asked me to lecture on that. So we'll see where this takes me, but perhaps I will do another one. Don't tell my husband that, though. He thinks
It's a closed webinar right now. It's
yeah,
okay.
he's been very helpful to me throughout this process. But for anyone who's written a book, you know how challenging and how much time that takes. But it was a bit cathartic for me as well, because I could reflect on what we had done and think about all the good that we did for San Antonio. I dedicate the book to the residents of San Antonio because we did all of this for them. This was about getting the organization in financial shape, to do the best with the basics so that we could think about what else do we need to do to make it an even greater city. So we'll see.
Do you have any other questions?
We're good.
Okay.
Wait.
So the last word in your book is checkmate.
Huh.
So do you want to give our guests any insight into?
Well, I don't want to spoil the ending of the book. I'll just say that there was an article written a few years ago about me, and I hadn't read it at the time because, as I said earlier, I wasn't looking at all of that. I needed to keep my focus to be able to lead the organization. My editor actually found the article, and in it, Laura Barbarena, who's a political consultant in the community, had described me as playing three-dimensional chess at City Hall while the others were playing checkers. And when the fire union arbitration award came down in February of this year, there was a meme that circulated within the department created by, I'm assuming, a firefighter. Otherwise, how do they circulate that among the firefighters? The chief sent it to me and said, "Have you seen this?" And I looked at it and I said, "Whoa, I guess we won." No, I haven't seen it. It had a picture of me and a picture of the union president next to me, and it had me saying checkmate with another word, which I won't say on this show, and it had him saying, "Oh darn, I thought we were playing checkers." And several people wanted me to use the meme in the book. I didn't use the actual meme, but it was ironic that that came out because in the end, then I do use the word checkmate and of course have two chess pieces there symbolic of this, with the Queen standing and the King knocked over.
Nice, that's perfect. Well, this is probably a good place to end our interview. So I encourage you to get a copy of this book. It really is a page turner. I never thought a book about city government could be a page turner, but I promise you this one is. So Sheryl, thank you so much for spending your time here. And also thank you so much for what you've done for the city of San Antonio and your continued support of United Way.
Well, thank you so much, Brad and Debbie. You both have been big United Way supporters for so many years, New Star as well as SWBC. Charlie chaired the board. He chaired a campaign as well, and he and Gary have been big supporters. So I thank both of you. And aren't we fortunate to be in a community where we have so many wonderful United Way supporters? And I want to say thank you to Women United and all of you who tuned in to this program today. Thank you for your participation in the program.
Yeah. And before I turn it back over to Debbie, let me add my thanks to Sheryl's to thank Women United. What you're doing for the city of San Antonio and for United Way is tremendous, and I applaud you all. And I look forward to hosting everybody at New Star next year. So, Debbie?
Okay, we've got you on tape saying it, so we're good. Thank you, Sheryl, for your time,
You're welcome.
your grace, your beauty, for leading in so many different ways. We really appreciate you. Brad, thank you for spending your time and your treasure with United Way and Women United. And it's come a bit of a tradition where we honor the chair by naming a scholarship after the chair. And we identify the scholar. And we would like for you to meet her when we get the chance where y'all can do some meeting, not 6 feet apart. Her name is Samantha Soto. She is an advisor actually with us. She is a first generation college, going to college. She's a single mom, and this scholarship has been the difference between her being able to get into college and support herself and her son. And one of her quotes is that she's just not doing it for her. She's doing it because she wants her son to see that he can go and get an education and that he can do it too. So I think that's very wonderful, I think, for you and what you're doing for Women United.
Thank you.
So ladies and gentlemen that joined us today, thank you. Please go out and get this book. There's a sassy little chapter named something that I'm not going to say. So read it, because it even gets better than the title. One of the things I also wanted to do is actually thank KLRN for this wonderful facility, for making us feel so professional today in our webinars and having to go virtual. I would be remiss if I didn't thank Mary Rose Brown, if I didn't thank Joanna, if I didn't thank Caitlin, who just recently had a baby, for all of their work and special events and everything that you do for us, for Colette and our United Way staff, as well as Charlie and Gary and SWBC for giving me the time to be able to invest in the community the way that we do. So thank you, SWBC. I also can't quit. We can't shut down without me doing a plug for our Power the Purse, ladies. It's coming up October 14th. Please put it on your calendar. It is going to be an incredible evening. It's going to be a ladies' night in, so you can have your little flip-flops with some fabulous blingy top if you want. It's going to be blingy and it's going to be bubbly, so please make sure your invitation will be emailed shortly. If you have any questions, obviously you can reach out to me, but put that on your calendar. We're looking for purses as well right now and sponsors. So with that being said, I better read my notes just to make sure. So Mary Rose will be proud of me that I read everything I was supposed to. Have a super evening, everyone. And don't forget to remember that we're Women United, living united. Thank you.